I'm Summer Falgiano, and you're tuned in to Badasses in Tech. This week, we're joined by Snigdha Jha, data engineer and tech badass. She's here to share the benefits of understanding data in the workplace and how it's helped her to combat imposter syndrome.
When people hear about data scientists or data engineers, it's not as glamorous always as you may think, because 80% of my time goes into data cleaning and data prep, because you have to make sure that the data that you are bringing insights on is extremely clean and without any bias, because amazing, beautiful insights on top of an unclean data or unbiased data is of no use.
Yeah, I could only imagine.
Yes.
Wow. So what would you say is the biggest challenge? You said that you're spending 80% of your time cleaning, when I'm sure what you just said, to me, the most interesting part of that would be the analysis. So
Yes.
what do you think is kind of stopping you from getting that to be a quicker thing, the cleanup?
Right. So regarding the cleanup, it's a very hard problem. It's you can't automate cleaning up the data right away,
Right?
Because you have to make sure that the data that you are bringing into the warehouse for analysis, that data is important from the analysis point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, you may see 100 columns which has legitimate numbers, but it does not add anything to the analysis, anything to the insight. So you have to make sure that the data that you are providing further to the teams and for those decision making, those columns, those values are important from understanding of analysis, insight. You have to make sure that people don't end up confusing causation with correlation. You have to make sure that people don't end up bringing their own bias along with insights, because you at the starting stage introduce that bias yourself. So all those things, I think, are although it takes 80% of time, but I think it's time spending. It's worth time spending that time. And also, and why I do not mind doing that cleaning and prep is because I ultimately get to use my own company's tool, which is ThoughtSpot.
Okay.
And I'm not here to advertise my tool, but I honestly would say that a lot of that burden from the analysis is taken away by the tool itself. So I can spend more time in making sure that we are bringing as many data sources as possible. We are instrumenting as many event collection as possible with all the third-party tools itself, so that we have a more richer insight, more richer analysis, and decisions could be made on top of that.
I love that. Could you give an example of a use case of how you have had, a complete business impact, maybe on the consumer end, maybe from a client that ThoughtSpot has worked with?
Sure. So the advantageous position that I am in, I get to be the consumer of the tool, of the data itself. So I can give them the first-hand experiences or first-hand insight about how I feel about a tool when I am working on it. So what happens is, for example, if there is a certain feature that the design team is interested in looking for, or the product management team is in looking for example, if this feature is even accessible to the user. For example, we've spent all these months trying to create this feature, but are the users actually consuming it the way we intended to? So since I know the consumption part, I understand the use case. I can get into the user perspective, and when I then start analyzing the data, I don't just look at the numbers. I look at the context as well. For example, if the user did log in and this is the page that user landed on, what were the things that I first looked at? And then, so for example, so there are two things that I do with that. One, I bring my own hypothesis. Second, I let the numbers talk. Because if I let my hypothesis talk too much, there is a risk of biasing the data, as I said earlier.
Yeah.
So these are the two things that I do. One is bringing my own hypothesis as a consumer, and then I look at the numbers without that bias, and I try to see if that hypothesis holds true or not. One, irrespective of the hypothesis standing true or not. Then I build a story around it where I walk through the product managers or designers that this is how the user must have had thought, or this is what user's context could have been, and this is how the feature was useful or not useful to this person. So this is why I'm in a very advantageous position in ThoughtSpot, because I don't just have to see meaningless numbers on my screen. I get to weave a story around it. And not to say that I'm amazing, I'm getting better at it. The moment I start saying good things, the imposter syndrome kicks in.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds like you're able to, with data, you're able to do website design, or maybe even troubleshoot a user journey.
Yes.
And maybe for other companies too, they could have some sort of part in maybe creating an actual product. It sounds like there's a lot that can be done with this new term, like you mentioned earlier, data engineer.
Right.
There's a lot more that can be done than those two words that
totally.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think you did a really good job at explaining that, because I a lot of people, like you said, it's new, so a lot of there's a lot of education that needs to be done. So what would you say is the number one thing that people get confused, that you would really like to shine a light on?
Confused regarding the role, or
data science and data engineer, I guess the career, the role.
Right. So I can walk you through the how I landed up in this particular field. And so I did my bachelor's in computer science because everybody was doing it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't one of my passions. And when I went into it, I loved the algorithm part of it. I loved how we can use technology to unearth so many things. But what I was not a fan of was coding. So I never associated myself with being a coder, because all the representation that you would see in the movies is a guy in a black hoodie and
exactly
numbers.
Yeah.
And trust me, that's not at all how the tech world really, like, if you want to have a career in it, except if you are an ethical hacker or a non-ethical hacker. But unless that's it, there are so many other things that you can do in tech. And so I was very fortunate enough to get into business intelligence world very quickly. So I used to work on a lot of SQL queries. So SQL is a language for a relational database, where you put in some query. For example, you want to see how many cities have had the maximum revenue. So this is the basic unit of data query. So for 3 to 4 years, I was into reporting that data. I was into, so I was in a position where I would get the cleaned data, where I would get the data in a format where it is ingestible by me, or where it is ingestible by for somebody to create reports on top of. I did that for 3-4 years, and then I always used to wonder how the data is extracted. But then I would always have this thing that, it's too much software engineering there. Maybe I won't be good at that. And then I came to US. I did my master's from Kent State University. I was lucky enough to become a web application developer intern there. And that's where I realized that coding is so much more logical. It can be exactly what it can be exactly used to get the results that you want out of it. You don't have to learn everything about coding, and you don't have to learn C++, Java, Python, or every other language that is out there in the market. Understand the use case that you want to get the results out of. Coding is a language. So, for example, if my use case is I want to extract the data from raw sources, and I want to clean it up, and I want to present it in a relational format, or in a reporting ingestible format, I need to look out for the language that is out there to do that. I got to know that Python is the best language to do that. I learned it, and I used it for my use case, and within no time I was good at it. So I think my whole even with the data engineering, or with any kind of engineering, I think the thing that we get in reverse is we first learn every language, Then we identify the use cases that, oh, maybe, this because I know this language, let me do this use case. I was fortunate enough to know the use case or the thing that I wanted to do,
Right.
and then learn the language to emote it. So, and then I came to ThoughtSpot, where I have had multiple opportunities to do everything from data engineering, which is fetching dirty data from these sources, to cleaning up, to prepping up, to understanding the business use case of other teams.
Yeah.
Which is which I will say is the challenge and the most exciting part of this job. And then presenting the insights. And even if you are that kind of person, like every data engineer doesn't need to be a storyteller,
Right.
but I like weaving stories around
It's
the
easier to
insights.
understand.
Yes. So
sure.
and then getting to present that story, I think that's what excites me most. But there are so many different permutation and combinations of the role of a data engineer. So again, having said that, I feel that there's a lot more education that needs to be gone out, that no one specific way of doing data engineering is right, and and the other way is wrong. It's okay if you are more into analysis and less into the software engineering part of it, and vice versa.
I love that. And I think too, a lot of people don't think, oh, I can make a huge business impact by learning this specific thing. And so you would probably say that's absolutely wrong. Like, you can.
Yeah, oh, you can. So a little bit actually adding to that answer. So right now, what I do is I take into consideration the user feedback in the form of an NPS score. I take into a user's usage of the product, and then I try to see how does a happy consumer react, how does a happy consumer use the product versus how does a sad user use the product. Is the happy, and what's the persona of the happy user? Are the users who are into more technical side of my product, are they the ones that keep coming back? Or the consumers, the content consumers, for example, people who just want to consume reports, are they the ones who want to come back to the tool more? So when you want to talk to the stakeholders, when you want to talk to the leaders of the team, you always have to talk in terms of revenue. You can't get very subjective around that. And this is why I love being a data engineer, because again, two things. One, I am a huge flag bearer of imposter syndrome. So every time I'm in a meeting and I'm like, oh, maybe what I'm saying might not be right, because that's just my gut feeling. And then all these kinds of questions start coming in. What do I know? What experience do I have? But with data, I don't have to think all of that. Data is data. And then that way, I don't also get too attached to my own hypothesis.
And because the numbers don't lie.
Exactly. And numbers don't lie. And also, it's so much better to communicate with the other person when the data is in front of them. Because for example, if you have built a certain feature, and if I go and tell you, that your feature is not working, and then storm out of the room, that's a different conversation, rather than saying that, see, I feel that the numbers are saying certain thing about the usage of this feature, and can you enlighten me more how this could be in a certain different way? So the defensiveness turns into cooperation. So this is why I feel that bringing data into the picture creates business impact, because then you are not fighting in the meeting. Collaboration. You and then you are less likely to be attached to the result of the conversation. Then you just don't want my idea to succeed or your idea to succeed. Then you just want the data to be fine after implementing this idea, and then you end up actually on a more solution driven.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So you mentioned imposter syndrome a few times. I'd love you to expand on that. What is that?
Okay. So I always had this. I did not know that I always had this. Like I've only a year ago I got to know that there is a term out there for this. And let me also clarify, it's not gender specific.
Okay.
It's not gender specific. It's not age specific. It's not anything specific. It is like all of the people around me at certain point of time in their career or in their life, they get hit by imposter syndrome.
Okay.
Some people do manage to come out of it, and for example, I would say that data has been that rescuer for me.
Nice.
Because now I tend to doubt myself less, and instead of being emotional about it, I try to look at it from more objective standpoint of view. But I think that for the longest time I felt that since I'm not a hardcore coder, I may not be a legitimate computer science student or a computer science professional. So things which do not get represented in the mainstream media, that tends to give you that doubt about you, or the anxiety about you. Because I had not come across many people or many interviews like these, where you are talking that you can be technical, and at the same time you can be interested in weaving a story around the data. Right. And telling the insights as it is, and brainstorming it more, instead of just walking in and like a genius drop a solution and walk out. So I think those things did the misrepresentation of tech field in movies or in interviews or articles, I feel did add a lot to my imposter syndrome, and I think people around me as well. Data definitely helped.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what if there are other people out there who are battling with imposter syndrome, or maybe even, to your point, don't know that they have it? What are some symptoms of imposter syndrome? And then also, what would you say for people who are experiencing that? What aside from data, what would you say that could help them maybe overcome that?
Okay, so one of the symptoms that I started feeling that like I was saying that this to myself a lot. I had this in my mind. I wish I should have said this in the meeting.
Okay, yeah.
It's not because of the lack of the confidence or the lack of communication skill that I could not say that. It's just that I was doubting myself. I was questioning myself again and again. I would keep thinking that, this person is definitely more experienced than me. What do I know that is better than what this person is talking about? And I think that was one of my major flags in understanding that, yes, probably I am over doubting myself, and I am the one who's stopping from really making a contribution in a meeting or in a brainstorming session. And so many times, for example, what would even happen is that if I do present an idea, and if somebody would get defensive about it, that is where I would get a little aggressive myself.
Yeah.
And then the whole conversation, the whole brainstorming would go out of the window, and the conversation would only revolve around, this person insulted me. So
trying to prove,
yeah, exactly. And all these things. So a lot of articles on Medium, actually, I would give a huge shout out to Medium in my life right now, that I got to know about all these people that they would talk about how to remove the emotion not out of you as a person or a meeting room, but emotion out of a discussion. So by removing emotion out of the discussion, what I truly mean by that, for example, if I'm presenting an idea, instead of saying what my gut feeling or what I believe about it, I need to present facts around it. And I think what helped me was to understand my own biases. I know this conversation, like every time I have this conversation with anybody, this conversation turns philosophical, but I feel that understanding my own biases, understanding my own triggers, that probably I was being more defensive at that time, probably I was not being as rational or as objective as I should have been. So I think that helps in helping with the imposter syndrome.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. To hear more, check out our website, badassesintech.com, and join our community. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SoundCloud, so follow us and tune in next week. That about sums it up. I'm Summer Falgiano, and this is Badasses in Tech.